Hello makers and welcome back to Spectiva Studios. It's really good to have you here. Now one of the challenges that I run into as an artist, especially a collage artist, is every so often you get daunted by the empty piece of paper. So when you're looking at this blank piece of paper sitting in front of you, there's so many possibilities that sometimes you get frozen in place thinking about all the different things you can do. And one of the things I've learned to get past that is to be able to create some sort of a foundation that I can build upon that isn't necessarily that blank piece of paper. Let me share with you what I'm talking about. So one of the things I did a couple of years ago in a piece that is no longer in my studio called Love Death, I was collecting the headlines that were coming from the COVID experience. It was a very tragic time, a very scary time, as many of you already recall. And so a lot of the headlines that were showing up in the newspaper, I was clipping them and saving them, thinking that someday I might have a use for this. And the result was Love Death, which is really the struggle between life and death and the people trying to really work it on both sides. But I also played around with things like this piece here called Secret Identity. And Secret Identity, if you look at the background very carefully, it's made up entirely of speech balloons from comic books. Yeah, that's a lot of cutting, by the way. You put on a couple ball games and you spend time with a pair of scissors making a pile, but I really like how it came out. But again, that was the foundation, and then on top of that I was able to put my stencil, in this case of a character in his secret identity, on top of that, just as, again, a point of whimsy and something I was trying to do. Now, more recently, I was thinking about how do I take advantage of some of the found materials I've acquired in my travels, as well as some of the things I've kind of bought or purchased planning to use them. Let me share with you what I'm talking about. So I, like anybody else, I leave the house from time to time, and I find interesting things in secondhand shops and consignment shops and thrift stores. So, for example, I found this book of music. It's just old music pieces. And I said, wow, that could be really interesting elements. Again, being able to have musical notes if I want to drop them into something I'm working on. And I'll show you a couple of ideas that I came up with that. Also, an old dictionary. You may not think much about it, but there's a certain kind of beauty to this, just owing to the fact that it's something that's also very familiar to most of us, right? We've seen dictionaries, and something that allows us to the familiarity, but also kind of the format and just the fact that it is a lot of information collected in one place. And to that same point, being able to pick up something like an old world atlas. Now, this is a fairly old one, but again, maps of the world, and the question is, how can I reuse some of these maps over time? So one of the things I did recently while I was thinking about this is said, let me pull together some examples of some fun things that you might be able to do with these kind of materials. And so let me share this with you. This is a combination, of course, as you might be able to see. We'll zoom into that a little bit. A combination of just different pages from the dictionary. And again, if you overlap them with one another, I find it creates a really interesting background. Now, is this art by itself? I mean, it could be, but I think this could be a really good foundation for something that sits on top of this that's representative of, say, language or something that has to do with maybe some of the keywords that are showing up in here. So that's kind of a fun thing. Likewise, we can come in here and cut up sheet music and say, let's get some music in here and create a foundation. Now, I like that okay. One of the things I did discover, which I'll share with you, is in trying a couple of different things. For example, these are pieces from the dictionary pages that have been torn and re-put down, is I find it gets a little chaotic. And again, that may work for certain pieces. I don't know if it worked necessarily for what I wanted to do. And here's one that's even more. These are just basically torn up pieces of the dictionary that have been pasted down. And again, it creates its own vibe and its own thing. I do find it a little chaotic, and I think one of the things I would caution against is you don't want to have a background that's more interesting or stands out more than the stuff you're putting in front of it. So something to consider there. But also to keep things a little bit more simple is an opportunity to do something like take that sheet music and make it as the foundation, right? So being able to take a sheet of this, found a theme called love, because that's a good way to start any piece of artwork. And what can I build on here? Maybe there's some red hearts, or maybe there's some things that you could really do. Might make an interesting Valentine of some sort, right? Likewise, going into my atlas, being able to find something, this is a Saskatoon right here. This is part of Canada, and it's just kind of an interesting but fairly neutral style background. And again, it could be a very interesting thing to build upon depending upon what kind of ideas, whether I'm drawing, whether I'm putting cut paper pieces on here, just building something out on top of that as well. Now, another thing that we can do doesn't have anything to do with cutting pieces of paper out of anything. It might have to do with just laying down a foundation that you can start with, and sometimes using marks. Now, marks are usually described as something that allows us to go in and take a pen or a pencil and go and make lots of marks on a paper. And so what I've done here is just, what if I wanted to have something that looked like it was language, like a letter? Not in anything that you can read, but I wanted to use this again as a foundation that I could build on top of. What would that look like? Now, one other thing I'll share with you regarding these types of materials is how you might use them if you're not using them as a background. Let's say we have a foundation here, just our basic blank piece of paper. But by going into these different elements and making interesting shapes, there's one for some music, and here's one from our dictionary, and here's one from our atlas. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that all three of these would go well together, but who knows? Maybe they would. If it's a very academic style sort of thing, right? We've got music, we've got language, we've got travel. It sounds like a pretty good life to me. And again, just the interesting aspects of these shapes and how they might interact with one another or interact with other elements that you have is really the foundation of what we can do here. Anyway, that's all I wanted to share with you this week. It's a short one, but I wanted to share with you the importance of being able to have a good place to start. Again, as we start a new year, it's just really nice to have something to jump into. I want you to feel comfortable with the process. I don't want you to ever stop because you might do it wrong, or you might make a mistake, or it might not turn out well. There's going to be some guaranteed moments in your art career where that's going to happen. You're going to create some stuff that is not going to be what you want. You know what? It's a learning experience. You move on from there. Anyway, that's all I have. Thanks so much for joining me this week. I always appreciate you. And I'm Spider. I'll talk to you next time.